been a long time. I shouldn't have left you without a dope vid to step to. Although this is audio only, I felt it was time for this one because I was browsing around and I saw something very intriguing and I sensed, I could be wrong, but I sensed a shift in the crypto business that I hope is for the positive. And I want to talk about it because I think that it bodes well, hopefully, if it's true as I sense. This idea of rebase, and of course, SAFUU is at that list, Titano's at that list, and so many others. The idea of rebase, as I've called out on many of my videos at cryptotalkradio.net, I've called out multiple times that there's a lack of sustainability, and it didn't seem like people really cared to test sustainability of a project. I am going to, therefore, in this video, in this audio, I'm going to target SAFUU, because if you're open-minded, I encourage you to go back and listen to the archives for SAFUU of my coverage where I specifically said, I don't think it's sustainable. That stood out in my messaging. You didn't really fully understand why. Hopefully you understand why now, because it's at its near all-time low launch price or thereabouts. Do as I said in the original video though, and then later, once it craps, do I think that it'll recover? Possibly, likely. It's really going to depend on the sell pressure, because once it gets to a certain part down, then it depends on that level of sell pressure. This is what we're seeing with Bitcoin. This is what we're seeing with Ethereum. This is what we're seeing with SHIB. As a result, we can't say 100% what's going to happen with any project. However, because you've got multiple factors and it all goes to liquidity, you've got a situation where we can't tell what's going to happen to the core token. So in this case, BNB is connected to Ethereum. Ethereum is somewhat connected to Bitcoin. Because we don't know what's going to happen there, we can't say for 100% what that level of rise is going to look like. Separately from this, there was an excessive amount of sell pressure around SAFUU when the thing started tanking as people dumped out of the project because they had a lot of money in there, and many of them either stabled or they jumped to another project. SAFUU has a lot of holders. SAFUU has roughly it has a little bit less than Libero, but it has a lot of holders, people that are still holding on to at least part of the token, but there was a significant dump out because, again, people were either stabling or jumping to another project. The key, though, is the institutional money, the large players, the big players. The only reason SAFUU got to the unrealistic levels that it got to is because it had a lot of institutional money, big players jumping into the project when they jumped in off the candles going up when it first launched, and the constrained inventory. The constrained inventory no longer became a thing because it was built to allow minting of tokens, because that's the way that the whole rebase mechanic can only work. Is the only way you can issue rewards is by way of minting. In my original video, I called out function mint and was called a fudder by the same car salesman, only to find out later, no, it actually does have a minting function, and then they changed it. Point is, you didn't come back and give my credit when I told you there's a function mint. I don't like seeing function mint. It should really be event mint. Regardless, it had more supply than it originally launched at. What I'd like you to consider doing is to learn a little bit more about why in the rebase world, having that mint function was always going to be the death knell for projects like SAFUU, because in a bear market, you're excessively printing to distribute rewards to people. And then the gimmick was that the, quote, fire pit, which the CERDIC called out that he has access to that, which was a risk that I called out in my video, was supposed to help allay this. All these burns and all this stuff is supposed to help allay this. That sounds good, but it still assumes a volume, because the burns only happen based on volume. If you have no volume and you do those excessive burns, what are you burning? You're actually burning money. It's not working, because at the end of the day, it all ties to market cap. Remember, the market cap on this guy was upwards of 50 million, if I recall, and somewhat higher. It's nowhere close to that now, and mostly because a lot of people dumped off the project. Now, at this point, it is no different, and I say this in terms of price movement, it is no different than where we were with LockPay for the same reasons as LockPay, that it doesn't really matter what gimmicks or mechanics you try to throw at a project. We have to start thinking differently about rebase tokens than we have in the past. Rebase tokens only made sense when you have both sides rebase. You have negative rebase and positive rebase, because that's how you're able to manage the inflation more effectively than just a burn, because the burn is only effective when you have high volume, which you don't have in a bear market. Most don't want to do the negative rebase because it is a bit of a shock to the users and you have to administer all that stuff. So what happens? Many of these tokens, like Sphere Finance very recently, fall back to the same old mechanic they had before, which is we're not doing the rebasing. We're just going to go with the burn and make it hyper-deflationary and call it a day. Doop. If SAFUU wants to go to a V2, which I think I heard was going to be the case, at that point, all they could do to manage the free fall would be to turn it into a hyper-deflationary without the rebase. The problem is that if you don't have the rebase to that degree, you don't then have the same utility you had before that enticed people in the first place, because you're not able to give that excessive amount of benefit to people. This is a hard lesson that had to be learned by the Sphere folks, by the Libero folks, and so many others around, okay, we got to turn off the rebasing. It doesn't mean you turn off reflections, but reflections have their own issue. So my call to you guys, I saw recently that apparently somehow, and I'm assuming it's just because he got set off, somehow OnChain Crypto, who is arguably the most provocative, the most combative of anybody that's done any coverage on SAFUU to date, has been the only person to somehow convince, and I think it's because he talked to the family, I'm assuming, somehow convinced the car salesman to come on the show and talk to him. I have no idea why that made any sense to this dude to go on OnChain when OnChain is arguably the most combative, the most argumentative of everybody that's done coverage. You go on that one. If it was because of the family, to me, that's something that you just resolve in the private and not go on that show because you were never going to get a fair shake, dude. You should have minimum gone on CoffeeZilla. And I don't know why you didn't. And maybe you did later after I record this. I doubt it, but you should have gone at least there. I extended an invitation when I first did the coverage because I'm pretty sure even the diehards will acknowledge, if you listen to every single feedback I did, has been completely fair compared to all the other ones out there that are somewhat critical. What I said was, he comes across as a used car salesman. Well, that's easy to fix. Change your delivery, change your style, change your presentation. If you want to be treated like a real business, I'm pretty sure you're not going to see Bill Gates acting the way this dude acts. That's what I'm talking about. Present yourself like a real business. That was my call. And then these issues in the code. If you resolve these things, then you're fine. Then I said that I don't think it's sustainable. And here's the price pattern I see. Well, that was obvious. It's based on the constrained inventory. It's based on the hype. It's based on these fundamental things. There was no call to action other than to have a plan for after it craps and what you're going to do to rebuild. This is normal analysis here. So I'll leave this point to everybody to consider. When I saw the back and forth between OnChain and the car salesman, I was absolutely flabbergasted that this car salesman, Bryan Legend, wasted his time going on that combative platform to just sit there and basically play defense while OnChain Crypto asks arguably irrelevant questions of him that have neither side learned anything. OnChain didn't really learn anything. He didn't resolve anything. Bryan didn't really defend anything because there was nothing really to defend because he was repeating the same answers. Nobody has asked the right questions of him, and that's because he doesn't go on the platforms that truly are neutral in their criticality that would hit him with the right questions that he should have a key answer that he's not talked about before, or if he has, the question was positioned in an incorrect way to try to get better answers for the people who are still left holding the bag. That's not happened. If he chooses not to do that, that's great. I support him. I support anybody who wants to gamble on the project. All I'm saying to you is we no longer can use the excuse of the bear market because right now, SAFUU is one of the few that still remains in the red, and that's largely because of a loss of institutional money. A lot has been dumped out of the project. Well, it's going to take a long time to rebuild that precipice because of the minting of tokens, which I called out as initial issue. Summary: if they still want that smoke and they'd like some help, I don't mind helping you, but you got to come down off it because I'm going to hit you with hard questions. And I expect those questions to have a straight answer, not a fluffy answer that I can independently prove. Then I can provide recommendations on what you do to rebuild after the fact. The first, number one, I believe we're at a world now where we no longer can base off of rebase. I don't think that it's a sustainable model. I don't think that going forward, we're going to be able to continue doing it. I think we have to rethink how we provide value to the investors for a long-term hold strategy. I think that with the constrained inventory, you have a strong opportunity to do that. But I also think there's that temptation to just mint because of the rewards that you give. Sometimes you can't have it both ways. Sometimes you're simply pricing based on the utility that you're providing, whatever that's going to be, versus you're just going to mint, understanding that during bear periods, your project's going to crap and you got to be okay with that. And as an investor, you have to make a smarter decision about whether you continually invest in projects that are simply going to crap at some point, and then you're a gambler like Kenny Rogers. That's perfectly fine. All of these are acceptable strategies. All I've ever asked is that you simply acknowledge and accept that you are a gambler. You're going to gamble on it and roll the dice and see if you can get something. I saw one guy flossing that he had $72,000 worth of value in his account, and that was roughly a week prior to the extreme dump that happened on the 10th. So hopefully he was smart enough to get out, or if he's holding, great. If you're holding, no problem. What we can no longer do though, folks, is say that SAFUU to the moon, doot, doot. We can no longer say it's the quote best. We can no longer say that it's the top because every last one of these projects is struggling. SAFUU more than the rest. Well, we have to look at the commonalities. These are all rebase tokens, and yet the other rebase tokens are in the green right now. These are all tokens that have this flex model. These are all tokens that have the fire pit. These are all tokens that have the same essential mechanics behind them. The only difference between these projects is who's in charge of the project. So if we accept that, and we accept that there's probably something wrong here, I think we should ask targeted questions then so that we can get the project back on track. Because here's my thought. I believe that SAFUU currently, the only thing really holding it back is the person in charge, just like Saitama. I believe it's a sentiment issue. I believe that the true institutional money doesn't trust the project. I believe they're not going to dump back in like they did initially because you got the CoffeeZilla sitting out there. You got all this smoke that he's not addressed. And unfortunately, he went on absolutely the worst platform for him to revitalize that sentiment. If he doesn't care, fine. But you have to listen to what he said in the video I talked about the reason for Petrova's failure. He specifically said, and I paraphrase, that the negative sentiment, all the quote FUD, all the negative chatter, it caused the project to fail. Well, what do you think you have now, brother? You have a lot of this out there and about, and I'm not even talking about the code. I'm talking about a loss of sentiment. You can still have the loyalists that are out there. You can still have the people who are going to hold. You can still have the people in your community. You can still hold in that corner and just say, this is all I'm going to focus on. That's fine. But you have to understand, chances are the people still holding are not your institutionals that would dump major amounts of money back into the project at this point, like you had on the initial pump. Remember, the initial pump didn't last more than about 2 weeks. So my point, everybody, is if you want, I said it before, if you want the project to succeed long term, you've got to address the core reason why it's likely not succeeding now, which the only thing left when you strip away everything that's left, go back to Dr. Spock, is the guy at the top, the leader, the sentiment, how people are feeling, are people confident, and all the stuff that's talked about that hasn't been addressed. Then going on a platform that's the worst platform, and it's an absolute cluster F, and nothing's being resolved. So, Mr. Car Salesman, if you happen to be listening to this, and I doubt you will, but if you happen to be, I'm extending an offer to you again. I'm pretty sure I can help you. However, you got to come down off it and accept that you may very well be the cause of the decline of the project. And if you truly care about the investors and the success of the project, it's not about throwing shinies at it. It's the same thing I just said on Libero. And I said that publicly. It's not about more shinies. At some point, you've got to address the root cause, the root sentiment problem that you have. And that may mean you get the hell out of the way in the interest of the project succeeding. Sometimes it's as simple as that. I did interviews with other projects where that's what they had to do. They had to shift around the leadership and shake stuff up and get a different set of eyes on something in the interest of the project's success. Because remember, it's not supposed to be about you. It's supposed to be about the project. If you believe this, then you should be okay getting out of the way in the interest of the success of the project. If you don't, then don't say that you are, because that means that you're double speaking, and that's just going to hurt it even worse.